A real hysteria has started in Russia. The head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, called on Russians to isolate themselves from the civilized world and build their own Russian civilization. And he added that Vladimir Putin was sent to Russians from above. He says that God himself rules Russia through Putin's hands. But his drinking buddy, Dmitry Medvedev, stated that if Russia loses the special military operation, then Russia itself will simply cease to exist, so all Russians need to go die for the sake of Putin and Russia. All this is happening amid ongoing strikes on the Russian Federation. On the night of July 29, Ukrainian forces carried out one of the most geographically widespread strikes in recent weeks. Against oil refineries in Perm and Ryazan, the Wildberries Logistics Center, the Black Sea Fleet boat base in Crimea, and a number of other military targets. And on the same day, Lavrov made a statement, quote, the entire civilized world has turned against Russia, and called for turning Russia into, quote, an independent civilization with limited foreign influence. Well, say goodbye to the internet. You won't have it, just like in North Korea. Well, and the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, called on Russians to preserve Russia at the cost of their lives. In general, let's go over the chronology of Ukrainian strikes on Russia and the content of statements by Russian officials separately. Because, well, sorry, but this is already some kind of madness. So, let's start this episode with a military report, with information about the strikes on Russia last night, and then we'll move on to these absolutely wild statements by Sergei Lavrov and Dmitry Medvedev. So, early in the morning on July 29, Ukrainian drones launched a massive attack on the Russian city of Ryazan. The governor of the Ryazan region, Pavel Malkov, reported that supposedly, as a result of falling UAV debris, there was a fire in industrial areas. According to analysis of eyewitness footage, one of the targets of the attack was the Wildberries sorting facility in the Ryazansky Industrial Park near the village of Tyushevo. The company Wildberries confirmed the evacuation of the logistics complex in Ryazan, explaining that the decision was made in accordance with safety requirements. By the way, as of today, 15% of the equipment has officially been destroyed. As Putin said, "Get to work, brothers!" The second target in Ryazan was the Ryazan oil refinery, which is part of Rosneft. This enterprise, by the way, is among the top 5 largest oil refineries in Russia and provides almost 5% of the total oil refining in the country. The plant has already been hit before. After the attack on May 15, it suspended its operations. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, confirmed on the morning of July 29 that the oil refinery and logistics center in Ryazan were hit. The distance to the target in Ryazan was about 360 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The second major target that night was the Pechiy of the Russian Federation. There, drones struck the Lukoil Permnefteyorgzintez oil refinery, damaging the AVT-5 oil processing unit. The governor of Pechiy, Dmitry Makonin, confirmed that, quote, several UAVs were shot down as they approached, stating that no one was injured. That is, I emphasize, the Ukrainian defense forces are working with great precision without unnecessary casualties, not like the Russians. Lukoil Permnefteyorgzintez is among the top 10 largest Russian oil refineries and is the second largest Lukoil plant after the Nizhny Novgorod plant. This plant processes about 13 million tons of oil per year. The previous attack on this plant occurred on May 7, after which the facility completely stopped producing petroleum products. And now they've decided to finish off the plant completely so that it will never be able to restart again. In addition to oil refining and logistics, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces struck a number of military targets that same night. The base of high-speed boats of the Russian Black Sea Fleet near Mezhvodnoye in occupied Crimea, a radar station in the Bryansk region, as well as facilities for storing and preparing strike drones in occupied Donetsk. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced the interception of 295 Ukrainian drones over more than 10 regions of Russia and occupied Crimea. And it's important to note here that since the beginning of this year, the armed forces of Ukraine have struck almost all major Russian oil refineries, because of which gasoline production in early July fell to 65% of the average summer consumption level for Russians. The campaign of strikes on Wildberry's logistics centers has been ongoing since July 18 and has already affected warehouses in the Moscow region, Tambov region, Krasnodar, and Stavropol Krai. Also, a Wildberries warehouse burned down in Crimea. Against the backdrop of strikes on oil refineries and new European Union sanctions, special attention should be paid to how Russia is adapting its export logistics. Russia has sharply increased oil shipments through the Arctic Ocean after the seizure of tankers by European countries, which are now allowed to confiscate cargo from illegal Russian tankers of the Shadow Fleet and simply sell it. Now, all EU member countries have this right. If they see a Shadow Fleet tanker, it's now simply profitable for them to seize it. They seize it, sell the oil on board, make some money, they just dump the vessel and that's it. Well, if the Russians want it, let them take it. If the Russians don't want it, it's confiscated, I don't know, cut up for scrap metal, and that makes money too. So now the Russians are trying to avoid Europe altogether. Despite the fact that Vladimir Putin just recently bravely called on his battered navy to boldly protect these tankers from the so-called European pirates, as he put it, he said, look, here's the thing, what Europe is doing with the tankers, this is piracy. The Russian navy can capture Europeans there. Well, in short, it was all bluster, but as we can see, the Russians still decided to simply go around through the Arctic Ocean. But there is also the other side of the coin. The interception of tankers by European countries has not yet led to a reduction in the overall volume of Russian maritime oil exports. Moscow simply compensates for the losses by redirecting the routes. Well, now we move on to my favorite part of this episode, the hysterical statements of Russian officials. And you know, I just don't know here whether to laugh or to cry, because it looks and sounds just a little bit creepy. The head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, came out with some truly classic nonsense today, which only emphasizes Russia is finally going behind the Iron Curtain. You won't even be able to look out from behind it. Next is a quote from Lavrov. Just listen closely. The situation is no joke. The president doesn't hide it. The entire so-called civilized world has turned against us, which is what they call themselves. Western countries have once again adopted the slogan of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, as well as the slogan of decolonizing Russia, which once again openly implies the dismemberment of our country. And then he goes on to say, do you see what happened to the Soviet Union? It collapsed. Now they're trying to break up Russia itself. Then Lavrov claims that European countries support Russian émigrés who are raising money to split up the Russian Federation. Here, of course, Russians in Europe should be on alert, because it's obvious that Putin's machine will start persecuting émigrés, those very Russians. And from this thesis, Lavrov draws a practical conclusion about the need for Russia to isolate itself from the rest of the world. Lavrov stated that Russia's national interest is to become, quote, an independent civilization and to reliably secure its borders in order to limit foreign influence on Russia. An independent civilization. He says, I'll translate, the logic is this, he says, let's isolate ourselves from the whole world, build an iron curtain, we'll close ourselves off under a dome, cover ourselves, and live here as our own civilization, so that, God forbid, the West doesn't influence us in any way. That's basically the Soviet Union. What if someone gets their hands on American genes? Are you serious? How dare you? That's inappropriate. We have our own civilization here, with bast shoes, kokoshniks, and a bottle of vodka. And at the same time, Lavrov also stated that the West insists on preserving, quote, the Nazi regime in Kiev, and that if we stop at the current line of contact, this regime will remain, and the Ukrainian territories that the unwashed Russians have seized, the West, he says, will not recognize. How is that possible? We seized them, but they don't recognize it. At the same time, Lavrov admitted that, and I quote, the West, and specifically Europe, will also eventually come to its senses and be ready to build relations on equal terms. But, according to him, by that time, Russians should live behind a huge wall and build their own civilization. And in that same interview, Lavrov called on Russia, quote, to get angry with itself sooner, claiming that anger helps speed everything up, including at the front. So he's saying you're being beaten, you should get angry. And in a separate statement, Sergei Lavrov said that Russia, listen to this, is being helped from above, linking this to the appointment of Vladimir Putin as president. He says this is divine intervention. It was God himself who made Vladimir Putin president of Russia. If you think I'm exaggerating or joking, find this interview, read it, go to my Telegram channel. I'll post all these quotes there specifically. And this is just insane. Lavrov said again that Vladimir Putin was sent to the Russian people by the heavens, and that Russia, through Vladimir Putin, quote, is directly governed by God, who approved the special military operation in Ukraine. I apologize, but this is already fucked up, comrades. It's honestly scary to live knowing that there's a country like this with people like that. But then Lavrov came out with a truly shocking quote. He said that the fact that oil refineries and Wildberries warehouses are burning all over Russia, it's the West's fault. Vladimir Putin says he didn't plan the war like this. He says Russians don't think it's our fault. Putin didn't intend for things to turn out this way. He says he planned the war in a normal way so that Russians wouldn't feel it. What you're feeling now is the West's fault. Quote from Lavrov, we began the special military operation in conditions where society was calm, comfortable, and generally satisfied with its standard of living. And the fact that this also did not suit the West is a fact. That's the West. They didn't want our society to be calm. They wanted to stir it up against the authorities. They were preparing provocations. They can't compete honestly. They are afraid of honest competition in everything. And now, in parallel with Lavrov's madness, the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Russia's chief alcoholic, Dmitry Medvedev, said today, quote, Russia can only be preserved by victory in the special military operation. And here you can clearly see the preparation of Russian society for total mobilization. Medvedev previously added that if Russia stops the fighting without achieving victory, the country will be torn apart, and Russia simply won't be Russia. In fact, as I see it, Lavrov and Medvedev are playing the same old tune. Bottom line, on the night of July 29, Ukrainian forces struck two major oil refineries in Ryazan and Perm, as well as Wildberries logistics and a number of military facilities. In Kiev, they are already openly stating that this is a new pressure strategy, and such strikes will only escalate. At the same time, Lavrov and Medvedev made a public statement on the same day about the need to isolate Russia from the West and that the war must end only in victory, otherwise Russia itself will cease to exist. And this overlap between military setbacks on the economic front and rising isolationist rhetoric, and I would even say the eschatological rhetoric of high-ranking Russian officials, indicates that anxiety and fear are growing within the Russian leadership. That's why they are trying to convince Russians that they should sacrifice their lives for the preservation of Russia. This very eschatological rhetoric is exactly about telling you, Russians, to give your lives for the sake of great Russia. Why? Well, because you didn't understand. Vladimir Putin was sent to you from above. This is divine intervention. It is the great God himself who appointed a president like this for us. Sorry, I'll say it again, but this is a fucking disaster, comrades. This is, and I have no words to describe this. What kind of nightmare is happening here? I'll leave it at that, and you can share your thoughts and conclusions about this in the comments below this episode. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so by donating through the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Пока.